James, you wanted to say something?
The sequential thing is a problem that I have also. I don't feel like we need to be spending $100,000 to do something that seems to be in the incorrect order.
Yeah.
So that's the first problem I have. And then the second problem is this is clearly a MAP style project. And I think one of the biggest successes in the MAPS program has been that we've been very upfront in what we're going to do, and then the city delivers on it. And this, because I agree with Councilman Shadid that in the marketing, I don't ever remember hearing anything about a hotel going along with the convention center, and it's clearly not being funded through the MAPS fund. So those are the two main problems I have, and that's why I won't be voting for it.
Ed, you also seem to be questioning the credentials of the consultants. Do you want to get more in on that, on if these are the right people we need to hire? Because this is a lot of money if these aren't the right people.
Well, I mean, they can answer, as to their credentials. I mean, my question would be, I'm not seeing, as I review the literature, I'm not seeing your name pop up. And so, can you assure us that? Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I think, PFM has a long history of providing independent advice to our clients, and we would expect to do that here. We've developed a pretty robust process around P3 that involves not just, just in my experience, taking independent assessments of whether it be a toll road, a parking lot, a hotel, a water system, any number of things that government invests in. Taking those studies independently, separate from clarity around your objectives and your goals for the project, is a difficult way to analyze things. That's why what we proposed is at the front end of the work that we do, that we would be working very closely with you on getting clarity around your objectives, ranking those objectives, and then using those objectives to help formulate the criteria for how you evaluate financial things. Because financial things in and of themselves, unless they're against policy considerations, which you have to decide upon, are difficult decisions to make. That's just our experience.
Yeah. Have other cities done it sequentially?
Usually what we do, we would recommend doing the front end piece of what we're doing before the feasibility study. I mean, that's just. But
you've heard the concerns, though. Why would we even do that if there's not if there's not a need for it? So. What you're hearing is consideration from the council that we ought to do one before the other.
Right. And sometimes the studies done in and of themselves without the context of your policy issues are studies in and of themselves, and they end up on the shelf. My experience, again, not making a broad statement, but in working with a lot of public-private partnership projects, especially when you're engaging the private sector, we have found that the front-end work, getting clarity around what your objectives are, both financially and policy-wise, also sends the right message to potential investors and developers that as you go further along in the process, you're able to be in a different position here. You're in the position of having facts, having knowledge, having information, as opposed to the process I described before, which is getting a bunch of proposals in, trying to wade through those and looking at apples and oranges and grapefruits and saying, well, what do we think is best for Oklahoma City? So we find the investment is well made early. We could certainly sequence our work and not be committed to, if a fee's a problem with $100,000, but doing some front-end work with you to lay the groundwork around objectives, I think is a valuable approach. But that's obviously up to you. We could work it either way depending on your concerns and however works best for you.
Okay. Meg?
Mayor, that actually was going to be a question I was going to ask. Would there be a way that we could sequence your own piece of this, that we might break that contract into several deliverables and look at the evaluation part first and followed with the market feasibility study, and then put those two pieces together to come up with a potential strategy? Because I do think the one thing that we've learned about this, and I haven't studied convention centers for 10 years, but the one thing I do know about them is it appears that every single one in every market is different. There hasn't really been anything consistent in the way these things are financed or the way the packages are put together. You know, we do have a great success story here with a very complicated financing public-private partnership with the Skirvin Hotel. And we know it can be done. And so my hope here is that in the next couple of months, we're on a really steep learning curve about current possibilities and what Oklahoma City, in its unique position, might hold. So,
but, you know, just if you're going to ask City Council to define their objectives, which I think is a good point, Tom, well, the objectives have to change to reflect what the market study says. If the market study comes up 0, which Mr. Stone indicated was a possibility, then our objectives is different than it is if it came up it's going to be a roaring success. So I think having the studies made sequentially, in deference to Tom, though, I think we don't have objectives until we know what the market study shows. We ought to do it one step at a time. And the market study ought to come first and to define what our objectives can be. If the market study shows a need for 1,000 rooms, then our objectives can be some way to fit around that. If the market study shows no rooms at all are required, that it's not a feasible project, then we have an entirely different set of objectives. I think we need to be responsive to what the market study says before we determine what our objectives are.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I just agree that the sequential way of doing it is a better way of doing it.
Kathy, how does this affect the contract and the dollar amount?
We can amend it however the council wants to. I mean, I don't think what you're talking about is doing them sequentially.
That's what I'm hearing.
I think we can either put off the amendment to PFM's contract until the market study is completed and bring it back to you, or set a start date in the amendment. I think you could do it either way, but I'm playing attorney, so.
All right.
We've got to put off the amendment until we have the results of the amended contract. We have the results of the market study. Because if the market study comes out 0, which I don't think it will, but if it does come out 0, then we won't have to go any further. We won't have to have this amendment because there's no need for it at that point. So I would think we
certainly do it that way.
Excuse me. Put off the amendment until we get the results of the marketing study, I think would be.
Okay. Yeah, Larry?
As I've listened to the information go back and forth, I see this falling into a couple of categories, and maybe I'm wrong, but I just want to share. I see some discussion in the opening remarks about past history, and I don't think that does any good to sit down here and debate yes or no what did or didn't happen, so I'm not going to address that. I do think that some of the information that was presented from up here was a little bit slanted in one way, but that's another issue. How do we proceed? I think that the question, and I would have for Jeremy, will you tell us if we need a hotel in your study, in market study? Is that one of the things that will come out of the market study? I'm being real simplistic.
Yes.
Do we need a hotel?
Yes,
and will you
that
tell
will
us,
come in the form of number of rooms.
Yeah, and that was my next thing. And you'll tell us how big a hotel it should be,
right,
and whether it should have this amenity, that amenity, or this other amenity.
Yes.
And we can decide whether we think that's a valid conclusion that you made. We can dialogue back and forth and talk about it.
Right.
When you come to that report.
I don't spend your money, so if you want to build any or all of it, that's up to you. I will tell you what the market can bear and the results and the impact that adding any rooms might have on the market, existing hotels, and proposed and incoming hotels that have been announced.
And then once we have that, then we can decide how we want to structure it, if we want to go forward, how we want to structure the deal, which I understand is pretty much the PFM's role in play.
Correct.
And then the other piece of the puzzle that I see being discussed here, which I'm not sure this is the venue to do, is are the consultants that we're talking about capable of doing this? And I think we have to, at this point, I have to rely on Kathy that she's vetted out the different consultants to do a market study and have picked Jeremy as the best source to get an independent reading and answer to the questions, do we need a hotel and how big it is? And so I'm in favor of the sequential approach, and I'm in favor of continuing with Jeremy to address those questions and move forward.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Kathy, how would you advise the motion to take place here? Based on what you've heard from the council and trying to set up some sort of sequence for these two studies.
You could strike the portion of the resolution that approves addendum number 1 to the professional services agreement with PFM, but adopt the rest of it that directs Urban Renewal to begin the process.
Wiley just ran into the room, but that's exactly what Kathy said is what I was going to suggest. Is I don't have the resolution actually in front of me, but based on the agenda wording, if you just strike the portion where it says "and approving the addendum number 1" and all provisions in the resolution relating to that, I think that probably would do it.
And Wiley is nodding.
All right. How about a motion then to reflect what Kathy said? Second. All right. Any other comments or questions from anyone? Cast your votes. It passed unanimously. Thank you guys for being here today and answering the questions.